وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Um, so I was a little under the weather last week, and I have the remnants of it right now. So I apologize if kind of the vibe of things is a little lower. And if you can't hear me, just let me know and I'll talk louder. But on Mondays before this, I teach 2 classes for our public policy school. They're lecture style, and then just end up talking a lot. So I think my voice is pretty shot at this point. So I apologize for that. We're gonna jump into the Hadith, and in a minute, I'm gonna ask somebody just to read it, the Arabic and the English of it, either or. So if anybody wants to just get that up and ready, Hadith number 15 in the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi, rahimahullah. And we've been talking about this Hadith for quite some time, but it's really important in the prism of etiquette and adab. There's so much in our tradition that talks about the importance of kind of having control over certain parts of ourselves. And of the utmost is a control of the tongue. And if you're able to discipline yourself in that regard, it's going to then build itself into a place of discipline in many other arenas in our lives, right? And may Allah make us from amongst those who desire discipline in our lives and then seek to pursue it. It doesn't have to just be something innate, but something we can actually learn, practice, grow, measure with metrics of assessment in a subjective way that recognizes a default state of being good, but a good person can always be better. And so here we've been talking a lot about this because it's important to understand it with some concrete measures, and not just the avoidance of what is problematic, but the increase of what is beneficial. Last time we met, we started to look at what Imam Ghazali rahimahullah writes about the 20 harms of the tongue, to also give us a baseline understanding of how we can start to now categorize actions and identify them, because a lot of this happens innately. Do you know? We'll talk about that in a bit. But maybe we can start, if somebody wants to just read the hadith. And why we do this, I mean, it's for a few reasons. One, you want to memorize these hadiths so they stick with you, right? Remembrance in our tradition is not just about kind of rote regurgitation of words, but the idea is when your mind is emptied of something, you then like remember the thing that you had engaged in that remembrance of. So you can't bring something to the forefront that you don't possess. Do you know what I mean? So if you memorize the hadith, right? Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyakul khayran aw liyasmut, then it's going to be something you can draw upon because it's now concrete within you. 2, and not in an order of priority, they're just barakah in reciting like the words of the Prophet alayhi salam. And we said this like in the beginning, but I realized like the beginning is like a year ago, right? A year and a half ago, we started reading this hadith book together. Like there's a certain deference in adab when hadith are being read and mentioned. Do you know that, you know, our teachers tell us you want to like lower your head as if the Prophet is actually the one speaking these words to you. You're giving like a sense of understanding of Quranic injunction that tells us to not like raise our voices in various regards, inclusive of you don't want your voice to be what's speaking over like the words of the Prophet being uttered. Do you see what I mean? And it spills into other arenas, right? Like, you know, but in that regard of like discipline, you know, and really allowing for yourself to feel the benefit of it from the words of the best of creation, alayhi salam. And then as you learn it, like in all of its facets, like distilling more meaning and extrapolating more understanding from it. Who are these cute kids that keep running in and out of this room? Is there an adult with the children? There is? Okay, good. Yeah, mashallah. And so when you go home, like even if you struggle with the Arabic, you can go on YouTube and search for any of these hadith and they'll just pronounce like the language to you. Do you know what I mean? And you're like reading it and learning it and understanding it, and building a relationship with it. Do you know? But wanting that for yourself is a first step. Does that make sense? So somebody read the Arabic and the English, and then we'll kind of delve into some of this a little bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
On the authority of Abu Hurairah, may Allah be pleased with him, that the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "Let him who believes in Allah in the last day speak good or keep silent, and let him who believes in Allah in the last day be generous to his neighbor, and let him who believes in Allah in the last day be generous to his guest."
Somebody read the Arabic.
عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر وليقل خيرا أو ليصمت، ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر وليكرم جاره، ومن كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر وليكرم ضيفه.
Jazakallah khair. So just to recap a little bit, like the Hadith is framing this in foundational aspects of theology. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir. The Prophet ﷺ could have mentioned any aspects of theology, but he mentions these two particularly, and delving into this idea that the exertion of these acts are indicative of one who believes in Allah in the last day. So if you're demonstrating belief in Allah in the last day and have a mechanism assessment, not that we're judging others, but if you want to be around somebody who likely has some of this, then they're probably doing these three things. It's not an exhaustive list, but something that gives us an indication. The presence of Iman in this with consistency will yield these things. Does that make sense? But the other part to it is that the increase of Iman in these things comes through the actions of these things. So it's an active like mode of engagement. Like you're engaged in the practice of speaking good. You're engaged in the practice of honoring your neighbor. You're engaged in the practice of treating a guest well. You see what I mean? And through the action, it yields itself like the potential for the increase of Iman. May Allah make us the strongest of believers. And so when you read a hadith like this, you want to also take from it and like do what it's saying to do. Do you know? And then try to think out, well, what's getting in the way of it getting done? So I don't remember fully where we got to when we were looking at the text on the Ihya. But Imam Ghazali, he first talks about unnecessary talk, which I know we talked about. He then talks about excessive talk, and he kind of nuances the difference. He talks about, spending time talking about like the haram. We talked about all of these, wealth and property. Obscene talk, cursing, we talked about, right? Yeah. And so now he gets into a section where he talks about songs and poetry. I think this is point number 9 that he discusses, right? So we did the first 8 of what he was talking about in the 20 harms of the tongue. And now he gets into this place. And so he says another harm of the tongue are songs and poetries. The good poetry is good and the bad of poetry is bad. The Prophet ﷺ said, it is better to fill up the belly of a man with pus than to fill it up with poetry. In short, poetry is not unlawful if it does not contain evil or indecent words. As the Prophet ﷺ says, there is wisdom in some poetry. The Prophet appointed the poet Hassan bin Thabit to attack the polytheists and to praise Islam, right? Hassan bin Thabit was one of the great poets amongst the companions, and they were essentially would like battle in these ways. Do you know the way you would understand ciphers to exist, today contemporarily? Like they would utilize poetry and create poetry as ways to dignify and honor, and really go back and forth, with people to demonstrate skill in this. A point to understand here is why we don't have reductive approaches to religion. So when we think about these two hadith, it is better to fill up the belly of a man with pus than to fill it up with poetry. And then another hadith that says there is wisdom in some poetry. If you take a text and you read it and just take it for what it says in the most literalist of things, then here now seemingly there's going to be a difficulty in reconciling like what apparently at a surface level is saying two very different things. Ours is not a religion that takes eisegetical analysis of things. We take exegetical analysis. Tafsir is exegetical. You're drawing meaning from a text. Does that make sense? What people do today that is more eisegetical is they formulate an argument and then they like pick a verse or a quote and say, this proves like what it is that I'm saying. But you can fundamentally turn a book into anything you want to at the end of the day. Do you know? People can take text and they could validate like transatlantic slave trades and crusades through it as much as they would validate dignifying all of humanity and harmonious existence. The book itself can, by virtue, be an extension of the individual. This is why knowledge and knowledge acquisition is important, but also the intention of why we acquire knowledge is important, right? And may Allah make us people of humility and not arrogance. But evidenced here is that it's not simply enough to say, this says this. And one of the challenges that we can draw from a methodology that reduces to the most literal understandings of things is that it separates text from context, and then it creates a conundrum. Do you know? There's a hadith where a companion comes and asks the Prophet, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? And he says yes. And another, he says, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? He says no. It's the same exact question. It yields a different answer. Do you know? And you want to see how text speaks to each other and how it fits into broader objectives that we've talked about in terms of like the maqasid of Sharia and what is like the increase of benefit and reduction of detriment. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir also means like speak when you know what you're talking about and not creating absolutes around certain things that might not have absolutes to them, or you just simply don't know. And when we have like narratives of people like Imam Malik, rahimahullah, who people would equate him to be the one that the Prophet spoke about as being a shining star that would come into Medina, you know, for his knowledge and scholarship and spiritual gifts that Allah blessed him with. And then narratives that tell us that people would come to Imam Malik from great distances asking him questions. And in one instance, he's asked 40 questions, and to 36 of them, he says, I don't know. And they say, like, well, I came from all the way, and you're Imam Malik, and you don't know? He says, I don't know, right? Here, if somebody just said to you, I heard this hadith in this TikTok video, on this like Instagram reel, and it's not to like sensationalize with culturally relevant, it's like how people access information, sound bites that get put into pieces, and you could find a video that would say, the Prophet of God said, it's better to fill up a person's stomach with pus than to fill it with poetry. It wouldn't be false. But then how do you make sense of it in relation to the hadith that he says in some poetry there's wisdom? The text without context becomes difficult to really take full meaning from. Do you get what I mean? And you don't want to be in a place where that's the approach to religion alone, because then you could turn a book or a text into anything you want to fundamentally. Do you know? And when you open your mouth to talk about religion, in particular, and you're making a claim that like Allah said or Allah's messenger said, by extension, either explicitly or implicitly, you just got to be sure that you know what it is that you're saying. And so the nuance here comes in from like categorically what we understand the permissibility and impermissibility to be rooted in is like the nature of the content, the recognition of what it is that things are calling us towards. Do you know? Artistry is a part of our tradition. Hassan al-Thabit, rahimahullah, like was a poet. Do you know? Other people were learned. They were poets. They like spent time engaged in these things. Why is this an important thing to understand? The majority of stuff that you have access to today, that you watch, right? Like I'm not going to ask people what they watch or what they listen to. Do you know what I mean? But the challenge in consumption is that the majority of what is consumed, streaming, audio, like whatever, is made by people who don't have the same values as us. And you're not distinguishing in a kind of condescending way, but think about, like literally, you turn on a radio and every other song is talking about things that are completely antithetical to our way of existence. And not about just the normalization of it or the sensationalizing of it, but talking in grotesque ways on principles that are hypersexualized, like objectification of women, language that's deeply vulgar, like all kinds of things that come into play. If you don't have artists that produce in relation to your ethics and values, you're going to then have things that are going to be consumed that then yield fundamentally what it is that they yield. And here, Imam Ghazali, he's saying one of the dangers of the tongue is that you can produce things like songs, like lyrics, like poetry that go against what our tradition offers. And it's important to understand that he juxtaposes this with the recognition that there's also categorically things that do not go against it. So it's not just a blanket sweep under the rug of like the entirety of it is problematic, but in being able to understand that it does then bear impact consequently. And we talk about a harm of a tongue, like what is it fundamentally harming? It's going to harm like perspective, worldview, all of these things, because it's now going and synthesized and it's going to inform and impact the heart. Do you know what I mean? You ever listen to a song and you just start crying listening to it? Do you know? Something that you don't do that? Yeah? No? Why? You're just a heartless man, Solo. I don't know what else to tell you. Yeah. But normal human beings, not like Solo, will sometimes cry when they listen to certain things. Do you know what I mean? Or like things that evoke memory from experiences, right? And understanding the sheer impact that it can have on these emotional levels. Do you know? It's all there and it's very real. This is why like certain recitations of Quran like yield different impact to you, because it's not just about like the tajweed aspects, but it's about the tartil aspects of it. You know, it's kind of being recited in modes that go through a wave of octaves that the way that we're built and wired, like we're impacted by these things. And just think like how much it is that you're engaged in the same way. Like you can demonstrate for yourselves like the impact of remembrance, like dhikr, right? The dhakirin. Do you know what I'm saying? People who are remembering like these words and they come up, like if you played something that you didn't listen to for 10, 15 years, you could probably still recite it verbatim, something that you heard from when you were younger. I'm not saying it's a bad or a good, but it then just starts echoing in your head sometimes. Do you know? You ever sat down with somebody and you're like, oh, now you got that song stuck in my head, right? And it's just playing on repeat, right? Why? Because you listen to it the way like the litanies and the awrad, if they were done as forms of dhikr in that way, they'd be just playing in your head, right? But we're wired in that way. Do you see what I mean? And it comes up, and when it's done well, like it can be something that's really spectacular and miraculous. Do you know? But in understanding it at the level of impact, everything in like consumer driven society has some element of this present. You know, you're not just like in a place where a commercial comes and some guy with like a monotonous voice is like, buy this soda, right? Like, eat this hamburger, get this car. And you're like, oh, I think I should get it. But they're engaging in every aspect of sensory perception, like visualized in terms of what you're hearing. It's got all kinds of things because the psychology of it is something that has been understood deeply, and how it is that you get someone to a place emotionally that they're purchasing now in an emotional state, right? It just comes down to words, songs, and poetry. And so this is something that is part of our tradition, and where and how just you start to think like in your own kind of creation of things. If you are engaged as a hobby or in like professionally, like the field of arts, you want one, like as a community, to we want to support our artists, but two, like the art has to be done in a way that also takes into indication what our tradition sets as parameters. And then three, like most of us are not artists, in certain ways. Some of us might be, or hidden talents, right? But like a lot of us, you're probably like singing, in the shower type person. No one can hear you, right? Do you do that solo? You don't do that either? Yeah, great. Yeah. But understanding, like, you don't have to be the producer of the poetry for you to speak it. Do you see what I mean? And you're speaking the words like that are just kind of coming as you've engaged them, and they're now being uttered by your tongue. Do you know? And they're getting put out there in like whatever shape or form that it is, and it's coming back inwardly. Does that make sense? So let's do this just because we want to get people going. It's been a long day. If you can turn the persons next to you, this is not an easy thing to avoid in our like situations, right? Because everything around us is essentially antithetical in terms of values and ethics, but we're still exposed to it. Our tradition makes a categorical distinction between simply hearing something and actively listening to it. So if I walk into a place where I'm down in Washington Square Park and like all kinds of stuff is going on, my kids like constantly like I've told my kids I don't think it's a problem that they know like bad words exist, right? Because they're gonna know bad words exist, right? Well, they just don't use the bad words. Do you know what I mean? And for however very long, like every time somebody says a bad word, because we live in New York City and we're walking down the street, you can't walk down 3 blocks without somebody dropping some kind of like, explicit language here or there. My children get very amused by this, and I don't know what I feel about that they find joy in that in some way. But in understanding, it's different if we're walking down the street and we don't fundamentally have control over it, right? Versus like it now starts to bear impact and presence within us because we're actively like expressing in our own sensory engagement, either verbalizing or hearing it, and trying to see like, well, where can I distill some of this and just acknowledge like the impact it has. But let's, for a quick minute, turn to the person next to you, exchange names if you don't know names. Like, what are you taking away from this so far? And then we'll come back and discuss. But go ahead. Hey.
I was told that I brought cake.
Oh, nice.
Chocolate tiramisu. There's coffee in it, so I don't know if the kids should be having it.
Okay.
Can I just serve it? Because last time not everyone
Yeah.
got something.
Do you want to do that?
I can do that now.
Okay.
But also like with a race of like like I love punk rock, like particularly. And I look like I know, and I look like I care. So people don't really, they're like, listen to like, so for instance, like, obviously, punk rock sometimes like just seems to like stuff. So like songs that like not so much like about God. I'm like, delete, you know what I mean? So, but yeah, I haven't. Obviously, we're all on our own. Also, like, being an artist themselves, like, being the that we're trying to put out in the world is not, like, what I am or what I am. Yeah, and 90% of my field doesn't serve that. So, it's obviously not easy. Just like any place where like not present is like but somebody I feel like or any way of a lot of like artists. We hung out yesterday and we were talking about folk artists. He said not everybody needs to artists. I'm like, some of us are celebrities. None of us. Me and Irfan are celebrities. Yeah, celebrity artists. We were just talking about this last night, and I think that's like you have to like have peers that are like on the same page as you, because we're fighting for that way. So it's not
But at the same time, all we have as resources is access to energy. So what's the likelihood of having that is Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to kind of think about, like, basically the gist of the conversation. Like, it's black and white, but you use space to bring certain levels of awareness. I think it's like, what I'm trying to say to not only connect people, but to share knowledge and to share, like, different perspectives and, like, really be active in a way that, like, nothing is going to change a lot of but I think, yeah, and I think that there's a lot of beauty in that. Especially as
She said she didn't want it. She wants to pass it out. Okay. So let's come back. We have a tiramisu cake with coffee in it, but it's being cut and passed out just so everyone gets a piece. Because last time everyone did not get a piece. So if people want to just wait for a piece, it'll come to you, inshallah. Or you can come grab it also. Yeah. Good job, Lynn. So what are some of the things we're discussing so far? What do we talk about?
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Manifestations of our faith and believing Allah and His Rasul is that, we we are mindful of what comes out of from our mouth, as well as in terms of what we take to our ears and how we process in our brain. I think every step on the way in terms of taking or bringing out something to do with our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something to do with tawheed. So
Yeah, 100%. You were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the way you articulated the fact that two statements of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam seemingly completely opposite of each other. So looking at it its entirety, I think it's important to understand that. The other thing, like living in a society where all this music, which is against the ethical standards of Islam, is so prevalent, that how can we uh, save ourselves from it? So I was giving an example that I grew up in India, and growing up, I heard it loud and clear that music is haram, and I like music a lot. I used to sing as well, and so for me that was like a dilemma. At one point of time, I completely cut off, all music. Back in those days, we used to have those MP3 files. I literally deleted in 1 second the entire library I had. Um, so, but at the same time, and later in my life, that as I learned more about the Islamic history and the Islamic, the evolution of Islam across Spain, across Ottoman Empire, and other regions, that the promotion of arts and culture was an integral part of it. And I think from what I heard was like I did not hear that part, right. That was like so if we have alternate music, which, like you said, is conforms to our ethical standards, and then we will, and if it is appealing and we get drawn to it, at least that will be keeping us away from, because otherwise we are so much surrounded by things which goes against our standards, is going to some shape or form, no matter how much we resist, will have an implicit impact on our soul.
Yeah, and just to kind of put it out there for people, so we have a even page. It's okay. Yeah, just to have a. They're okay. You don't have to. Yeah, don't worry about the. Hatu burhanukum, we're taught, right? Like, bring your evidences. Do you know? So when people have kind of a understanding of religion, like, there's a bunch of things that kind of get overtly emphasized, right? Like dogs and gender interactions and this kind of stuff. When you have an evidentiary based system, like, everything is not going to be clearly defined. What we call a qat'i evidence, it's like definitive in its meaning. Don't eat pork means don't eat pork. But you have text that's probabilistic, is called dhanni, right? And this is where you can have different opinions on things. So there's not different opinions on certain things. Do you know there's not different opinions on the fact that we have 5 prayers in a day? Do you know what I mean? It's like clear cut. We have 5 prayers in a day. There's different understandings of when some of those prayers start and end, but nobody's going to tell you there's not 5 prayers for Muslims in a day. Does that make sense? Right? We fast in Ramadan. Like, we have clear text that tells us this. Do you know? When you get to a place on something like music, there are different opinions on it. And the reasons why there's different opinions is because, like, the evidences yield different perspectives. And it's important to understand, because in an evidentiary based system, it's not I think or I feel or my grandmother said this or that, right? No disrespect to anybody's grandma. Do you know what I mean? But there's got to be a basis to it. Like, bring your evidence. That's what the Quran says. And so across the board, there's some opinions that would say, like the statement is too simple of a statement. Music is haram. You can only understand it through dissonance, because they literally greet the prophet with song when he comes into Medina. There's all kinds of things that evidence the presence of music, but like particular, like, kind of characteristics are now what get debated. So some people would say only like voice and voice synthesized, and they have a basis for this. Some people would say the utilization of like drums in particular, or all percussion based instruments, and they have a basis for this. Some people would say like any instrument is fine, and the issue is in all of these, like the content, the language, like what is it that's really being spoken about and addressed. our religion never had a problem with different opinions. It's more in the prism of modernity that people don't know how to really like navigate this well. And I need the answer always, like the right interpretation. And one of the beautiful parts about Islam as a religion, like in its onset, you know, when Mecca becomes now Mecca and Medina, and then throughout 23 years of revelation, companions are like going over the entire 23 years, taking what they saw and what they knew, and like it's not easily updated because technology isn't what we have today. You have to think about it in real time in historical context, like who is sharing what and where are they bringing it to and why they understand it in the ways that they understood it. But now, as they move from like that as the epicenter, the legislative and theological developments of Islam yield a lot of different realities, inclusive of like hundreds of legal schools of thought within Islam and how people understood Sharia. In Sunni Islam, 4 of these maintain themselves till today, but for a good chunk of time, there was a lot, they whittled down to this. But even if there's still 4 within like the Sunni tradition, it constitutes orthodoxy, all of them, not just one of them. Other religions like splinter into groups and break apart from each other and establish entirely separate like institutions because they need just the one way of doing it. Do you see what I mean? So, you know, like you can have a friend who in Ramadan, they're still going to be listening to something. And if they know why they're doing what they're doing, that's fine. You don't want to like get into a hissy fit and be like, oh my God, it's Ramadan, astaghfirullah. Like, why are you listening to this thing? Like, if it's a valid thing to listen to outside of Ramadan, it's a valid thing to listen to inside of Ramadan. But you can't discount the reality that like sound has on you. Our entire tradition is an oral tradition. It's a recitation, and you know that it does. And you want to recognize the realities of what some of these things impose. And it's all coming through words and language and sound and intonation. Do you see what I'm saying? It does have an impact on your inner self. Do you know? You want to just be smart about like what it is that I'm consuming, but also what is somebody consuming from you? Do you see? And you don't have to be a poet or a songwriter to be like singing this song. Does that make sense? You just want to make sure that the words that you're quoting on autopilot that are now ingrained in your head because you've done enough like regurgitations of it that you can't even get it out of your head once it's in your head, that those are the words you really want to have occupying space in your head. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other thoughts on what we discussed? Yeah, go ahead.
So one argument that we had, so when we approach the hadiths, so there's a chance of making anachronistic mistakes. So we know that the Quran is timeless. It may have like different interpretations from time to time. But to avoid such mistakes when it comes to hadiths, we have to kind of take the context in that history. And if you go 13th, 14th century back, the poetry was a type of a genre back in that time. It was like used mainly by, made by poets who were typically hired by figures of power to use them against their figures of power, their opponents, to kind of put them down, mostly using derogatory words. So in a way, I think if we want to, avoid such mistakes, maybe like something similar in our time, we were even like discussing with my brothers. So maybe like political debates, or maybe there was a debate between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, for example, like such typical things kind of offensive each other. So kind of in a way like that argumentative thing. So there's that aspect of it why they were like kind of looked down on like because his role was to kind of deliver the message. And when you do this type of derogatory comments, it's actually blocking, like it's kind of contradictory to deliver that message. So that was
Yeah, and there's contextualization to certain things, right? Like the Prophet ﷺ has a companion who on the day of war has like all kinds of kind of clothing on that's showing him as like a strong person. He's walking around like strutting, do you know? And the Prophet says, like on a normal day, that strut would have been a sign of arrogance. But he said today it's like a beautiful thing because he's showing the opposition, like we came ready to take you on. Do you see what I mean? Ethics are situational, but in everything, ethics can be present. So you really want to like think out, right? Like if I'm listening to something that is telling me that it's okay for me to mistreat somebody, like how can that coincide with what our religion tells us? You know, something that's telling me to like look down at somebody, something that's telling me to objectify somebody, something that's telling me to like just be in pursuit of what's materialistic. It can sound nice, do you know? No one's denying that when you have a monetized approach to artistry and millions of dollars are being yielded as billions of dollars are being also kind of transacted upon, people know how to create something that sounds really good to you, right? But like just because it sounds good doesn't mean that that's necessarily enough of a reason to become subservient to it. Do you know? And individually, you want to just spend some time thinking, like, how much of my day is spent like engaging in this and repeating it in certain ways, right? And as a clarifying point, the Quran as a text in and of itself also still has to be understood at times within the prism of context. Do you know? And reading a verse and saying, well, it says this, so it must mean this, is not how like a hukam is derived, right? There's a verse in the Quran that says, like when you read the Quran, fasta'id billah, then do the ta'awudh, like a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. And grammatically, when it's found in this imperative, one could say, well, that must mean that it's fard to say a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim every time you read Quran. But it's not fard like every time you read Quran, because if you had that as a fard, then you didn't do it. Leaving behind a fard is haram, and that can become a grounds to go into hell. May Allah protect us from it, right? So just in reading it and saying, well, it says this in this way, so that must make it an obligation. That's not how it fundamentally works. Do you know? And a lot of these verses have like reasons of revelation attached to them. They're understood from a grammatical standpoint, how the verses speak to one another. Do you know? And you like engage it as a text to understand it, but you also then turn to people and like you talk about it and you like reflect on it and you reason from it. And people who have spent time the way any discipline is like studied and learned, you engage it at that level so that the ability to ascertain meaning from it like continues, right? I had an uncle who wrote a tafsir of Surah Fatiha, just the first chapter of the Quran, right? 7 verses. We recite it in every prayer. It was a 7-volume book that he wrote just on an explanation of Surah Fatiha, right? How do you have 7 volumes? I don't even read a 7-volume book. He's writing a book, but like what's he extrapolating from it and how's he drawing upon it? Do you see what I mean? Right? And so just in understanding that, so this is like point number 9, right? Poetry and song, he says, yields like the harm from the tongue. The 10th he talks about is laughter and joking. And he says, this is like another harm of the tongue, right? It doesn't again mean that like laughter and joking is impermissible in our religion. Do you know? There's a hadith that says, وَلَا تُكَثِّرَ الدَّهْكَ فَإِنَّ كَثْرَةَ الدَّهْكِ تُمِيتُ قَلْبَ. That do not laugh in excess, because indeed in excess of laughter, it kills your heart. Right? And there's some people, they don't know how to deal with reality, because all that they do is spend time like engaged in what is fundamentally joking. The Prophet says, like, he jokes. The companion asks him about his joking, and he says, I joke, but in his joking, he says he's always speaking what's truth, right? And in understanding, like, he plays like jokes on different people. He runs races with his wife. Like, it's not about validating and justifying the somber individuals that many of us turn into. A verse of the Quran that I'd like for us to look at is Surah Al Imran. It's 159th verse. So it's the 3rd chapter of the Quran, and it's verse 159. Did somebody read it, the Arabic, the English? 159. Yeah, go ahead.
I can read it in English.
Yeah, go for it.
It is out of Allah's mercy that you, O Prophet, have been lenient with them.
Keep going.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait.
It's a long verse.
Okay. Have been lenient with them. Had you been cruel or hard-hearted, they would have certainly abandoned you. So pardon them, ask Allah's forgiveness for them, and consult with them in conducting matters. Once you make a decision, put your trust in Allah. Surely Allah loves those who trust Him.
Can somebody read the Arabic? 159. Yeah, go ahead.
فبما رحمة من الله لنت لهم ولا كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفضوا من حولك فاعف عنهم واستغفر لهم وشاورهم في الأمر فإذا عزمت فتوكل على الله إن الله يحب المتوكلين.
Right, so the entirety of this idea is giving us an insight. The Prophet ﷺ is sent, and he's sent to be light with people, right? He's lean with them. Do you know? There's like this sense that gentleness, that kindness, it's not like you're harsh and hard-hearted and everything is just like, hellfire, brimstone, like I'm going to put you into place. But there's modes of it, and it's straight Quran, right? And what he's saying, Allah Azza wa Jal, what he's telling us is that this comes from his rahmah, like that the prophet that he has sent is one that has this gentleness and not cruelty or hard-heartedness or harshness with people, right? May Allah make us people who are gentle and kind. So we have traditions that tell us like smiling is a charity, do you know? But it's important to understand that the crux of like a lot of discussions render now not just outward impacts but inward impacts. That's the whole point of what we're talking about. Like, your words don't just impact others, but they impact you also, and there can be harms in both directions. When your heart is likened to being positioned in essentially like a piece of land that can now have some type of growth to it, for any land that has capacity to reap a harvest, it necessitates some type of rainfall to hit it. And if there's no like tears hitting where your heart is landing, how is it going to grow anything? But just as problematic is like a piece of earth that all it is 24/7 being hit with is rainfall. It's not going to really give you anything either. There's got to be a balance in here. And the hadith is telling us, right? Do not laugh in excess, for indeed in excess of laughter, it weakens the heart. As you ideate on your own ability to reflect and contemplate, do you know what goes into the crux of my conversations with people? And it can be with an intentionality that understands, like, you sit with people and you spend time with them, and absence of spaces of vulnerability or expression, like creating a certain ease when you're the only Muslim in most spaces. You're the only person who represents certain parts of your identity in many spaces, and you sit down with people. A common outcome when you're in the company of people that you enjoy being with is that you're going to want to smile, right? Like, you're happy, you're going to smile. You're not going to be happy and be like, blah, right? Like, why do you look so mopey? Because I'm so happy. No, like, that's not how it works. When you're happy, it naturally brings a smile to your face. Do you know? Understanding it within the prism, though, if the only mode of interaction that I have is one that like is constantly around joking, constant like sarcasm, constant like kind of belittlement of serious situations, I'm going to get out of it what I fundamentally put into it. Do you see what I mean? And we likely have many people that we know, like, for whatever reasons, like little kids, this happens constantly. If you've ever sat down with children and they're trying to figure out how to fit in to a school, especially as a minority, like that isolates and marginalizes, and they're internalizing racisms, do you know? One of the routes, not the only route, but one of the route that's constantly taken is that you suddenly have to be like the person who jokes around. You're like a class clown. You're bringing attention to yourself as a way to find belonging and acceptance. Do you know? And you don't know how to like navigate seriousness. Do you know what I mean? It's not easy. People are bullying you and harassing you and whatever else, and to gain validation. But then for us at a communal level, right? Sometimes the variable that's missing is me allowing for you to have deeper connection, for us that you don't always have to be like joking when we're spending time together. We can have a comfort in having a serious conversation, not running away from like necessary feelings that Allah in his mercy endowed us with, that include things that we have difficulty in confronting. And if I just got to laugh and it makes me delusional and it makes me run away from reality, like, it's not like a good way to express, and it's having harm come back to my inner self, right? And so getting to a place where the excessive nature of it is important to kind of deal with. The 11th one that he talks about is ridicule. And he says, ridicule is unlawful as it gives pain to the heart of another, and thus he becomes sorrowed. Allah says, O believers, no people shall ridicule another people. Perchance the latter may be better than the former. No woman shall ridicule another woman. Perchance the latter may be better than the former. Ridicule means to neglect or hold in contempt another and to show his defects. It may be expressed in words and actions, and also by whims and gestures. If it is done in one's absence, it amounts to backbiting, right? So if I'm in a place where, like, at your expense, I elevate myself, I'm like literally debasing you in a way that we see this happen quite often. Do you know? And you might like channel it in certain scenarios. A kid walks in to, like my kids, I don't really know, mashallah. My wife did a great job, I think, in raising them. Well, I know she did it. But like my daughter walks into her school and she'll like, take like chicken makhni with her and like parathas with her. And we're like, I'm like, does she not care if people are going to think it smells strange? She doesn't care. Like, she just doesn't care, do you know? But channeling that as a source of like kind of internal loathing for a lot of minorities, they walk into a cafeteria place and some kids like, oh, what's that smell? And it's like the kid from this background eating something that's different from this. And then they start making fun of them. Why do you dress this way? Why do you like do this way? And there's constant ridicule, right? Debasing, bringing people down. You don't want to do that. Do you know? And ridicule can come up in a lot of different settings. If I'm an adult and my kid comes and tells me they want to marry someone, and I say, like, how can you marry someone from a different culture, a different class? And then I just open the doors to ridicule, right? Like, look at the degrees that they don't have. Look at how much money that they don't have. Look at like the ways that they dress or the ways that they speak. Do you know? It's crazy that somebody feels like it's okay to talk about somebody like that. Do you know what I mean? You can express what you need to express without getting to a place where you start to ridicule. And this is what he says: it is unlawful, as it gives pain to the heart of another, and thus he becomes sorrowed, right? What entitles you to create that? Does it mean if I say something that hurts someone or gets them upset, it's always wrong? No. My kids the other day, I took my kids on vacation last week, right? My son has like crazy, sweet tooth. At some point, I'm like, hey man, you need to stop eating this stuff. Like, Papa, what are you talking? Right? Like one night, I don't even know the kid. Like we were at a wedding, and one of his friends was there, my son Kareem, and I'm holding him. It's late at night, and Kareem had like eaten this cake and like all kinds of sweet stuff. He's a little kid. He goes to sleep at 8:30, so all kinds of things are happening, and he's like sitting on my lap crying. I'm like, why are you crying? And he's like, because I'm not gonna see like his friend, that he named his friend, and the kid was standing right there. And I was like, Kareem, he's right next to you. He's like, no, Papa. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, I just won't ever be able to see him again. And he's like, Kareem, I'm right here. Do you know? If I told my son, which I did, like, no more sugar, man, right? He's going to get upset. The idea that he's getting upset is not indicative that what I said to him is a problem. Like his nuffs, he's 9, right? I'll make it easy, is going to get in the way and get agitated. He just wants it, and that's enough of a reason for him to have it. But the better thing for me is to say what's upsetting to him. That's not what this is saying here. This is saying when you feel entitlement, that knowingly what you're saying is going to be hurtful at the expense of someone. And when he ends it and says, if it's done in one's absence, then it's backbiting, meaning like people have the audacity to say these kinds of things in front of people. Do you know? And I see it a lot. Like I see dads and moms speak so terribly about people that their kids potentially are considering as a life partner. You can say you don't think it's a good idea without being mean about it. Do you know? And when you're sitting with people and they're not there and you're ridiculing them, did you see how so-and-so and such was dressed? Do you see like the kind of things that she said or did not say? You just got to know you're killing your own heart, and then you got to stand in front of God with all of this. And the motivation of it becomes important to understand. Ridicule is not the same as getting counseling or therapy or talking about hardships that you've had. It's not about like sensible modes where the benefit is in talking about heaviness you're holding. But you are grown enough to know like when somebody is doing something that is purposely mocking, debasing, humiliating someone at the pursuit of gaining what exactly? Do you see what I mean? Right? And then it can become like real vile, do you know? And people have like all kinds of ways that these things come up. You're hiring people, you're like engaging in any type of assessment of somebody, friends, circles, like friendships get broken and you're trying to help someone heal. And then you just do that like by putting down somebody else, right? You got to be really smart about what it is that gives you a sense of empowerment that you're feel like bold enough to put down somebody else. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Like genuine question. What if it's something that's not true?
What if it's something what?
Like true about that person?
Yeah, they're saying if it's not true, then it accounts to backbiting. Do you know? Or if it's not true, then it's slander, right? And if they're not present or absent, then it's backbiting. So if you're saying something false, then that's like, can you give me an example?
Like, for example, when two friends fall out and you're trying to comfort the other one, and you say something about the other person that's not exactly positive, but true.
But it's not like ridicule. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Right? Like if, somebody in our community had an engagement broke off and God forbid, and it created pain for them. And then they're sitting down and someone says, like, he didn't treat you so well. Right? It's not ridicule, right? But it's very different from being like, you want to marry this boy, like I'm a doctor and you want my daughter, like you're my daughter, and you think like my daughter is gonna marry someone who didn't even like go to college, right? It's like what yeah, so why is that a problem? Right? Like there's a difference there. Do you see the difference? Right? And one is coming from a place of just egocentricity and Allah forgive us, right? But like in the subjective introspection, like a place of arrogance. Do you know what I'm saying? Right? Potentially. And it goes back to myself. Like, why am I mocking? Why am I ridiculing? Do you get what I mean? Right? Uh The Prophet said, the door of paradise will be opened before one of those who ridicule men, and he will be said, come, come. Then he will come to be relieved of his troubles, but when he comes, the door will be shut against him. He also says, alayhi salam, don't ridicule one from whose belly wind with sound comes out. Why should you ridicule one who is led to do so as a call of nature? And so it's just an understanding, right? Like, just don't be mean to people, right? And he's saying this is not like why you were given a tongue, not to ridicule and mock. The 12th thing that he says, to disclose secret talks. So the idea that like gatherings are like a trust, there's confidentiality that goes into it. The Prophet ﷺ says, when any man tells you something and asks you to keep it a secret, it is a trust. He said, it is a trust between you. Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah said, it is a breach of trust if you disclose the secret talks of your brother. So like, again, within reason, barring situations of abuse, oppression, right? But like we are in a place where there's confidentiality. People share things with me in my office. I'm not going to walk out of the office and go and tell them to somebody else. Do you know? I had a parent say to me that their child told them something like very vulnerably that they were struggling with. And the child became quite angered because the parent told the other parent what the child said. And the child said, like, that wasn't for you to tell them. And they were like, well, that's just, your dad. Like, why is that a problem? They got on the phone with me and I was like, well, like, it took your kid years to tell you this. That's like their story to tell, not your story. If you're trying to understand how to mend it, like, you betrayed a trust to the child. It's not helping by you, like, diminishing it by saying, well, the only person I told was your dad. It's not like I told the whole world, right? But when you're in a place where somebody trusts you enough to share something with you, like, it's not about just kind of putting that out to people. And there's got to be like some type of reason or purpose to it, do you know? So somebody comes to you, God forbid, and is like, I'm going to hurt myself tonight. Like, all things are off the table. You got to get that person the help that they need. Do you see what I mean? You don't know how to do that. You come and ask us and we'll help them. Do you know? But if somebody's coming to you and turning to you in certain ways, like, it's very important that you keep things to yourself that are not meant to be shared. Like, if you do the ghusl of a body for a janazah, you're washing a body that's deceased. You take people, the criteria is not like a family member or close relative, because family responds to death differently. If you were required to wash the body and you just didn't have the wherewithal to do it, that wouldn't make any sense. Do you know? Somebody could freak out seeing their loved one passed away on a slab, and then they had to spend like an hour like cleaning and shrouding and everything. But the criteria for washing the body is you got to be like a trustworthy person. So if you've never washed like a body before, literally now somebody is in front of you in like their complete like kind of uncoveredness, and their body has a sheet over them and you're washing them respectfully, but you can lift the body and you can see like scars and tattoos and piercings or indications of like all kinds of stuff. And if I see it, it's not for me to go and tell people like this is what I saw on this. Do you get what I mean? It's a trust, right? And so disclosing those things is not going to be something that like is as simple as like, oh, what's the big deal? Do you get what I mean? The 13th thing that he mentions is taking a false promise. So you make the promise and then you don't fulfill the promise, right? But also, like, you make a promise knowing that you're not going to fulfill the promise. And then the promise becomes broken. The Prophet tells us in a hadith, Ayatul Munafiq Thalath, إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا تؤمن خان, that the signs of the hypocrite are three, that when they speak, they lie. إذا حدث كذب, when they make a promise, they break it. وإذا وعد أخلف, and when they're entrusted, they break the trust. وإذا تؤمن خان, may Allah make us the strongest of believers, right? But these are actions that are manifest from the tongue, So you make a promise and you broke the promise, like it's a big deal. Do you see what I mean? Like you told someone you're going to show up for them and you didn't show up, like, and there's not really like a reason why, if I'm like on a plane that gets stuck because of the weather and I can't make it to your wedding, like there's nothing I can fundamentally do, right? But if I told you I was going to do something for you and I simply just did not do it, or I like keep committing to things that are just beyond my capacity to get done, you're leaving people hanging, do you know? And one of the key things that he says here is done in haste. You're not like thinking about it. Do you know what I mean? It's just like coming up and you're instantaneously agreeing without really recognizing, like, well, consequently, like, is this something that I could fundamentally really do or not? Do you know? And if that becomes part of your nature, like it's a sign of nifaq, may Allah protect us from it, that when you make a promise, you break the promise. When you're entrusted, you break the trust. Do you know? Appreciation and gratitude become linked to this because gifts that are given to you are meant to be utilized in the ways that the gift giver wants you to use them. You see? Right? Like, so, somebody leaves you with something and you have made a commitment to kind of honoring whatever it is. It's a big deal. And we're going through these to just think out, like, in the extension of speech that comes from me that is not khair, but is shar or lagu, right? Like, these are things that categorically can create a lot of problems. Having a false promise is, the 13th thing that Imam Ghazali mentions. The 14th thing, just to kind of run through them so we could wrap up with all of it today, he says is lying and taking false oaths. So an oath is different than a promise, right? Like if you take an oath, I swear, etc., etc. Do you know? A promise is like, don't worry, I'll clean up like the room, right? It's like, what happened? You didn't clean up the room. Like, oh, I just didn't do it. But lying and lying is like a big problem in Islam, and you might think that that's a very obvious thing, but like just think about like the stupid things that like people lie about. Do you know what I mean? Like these really ridiculous things, and consequently, it's bringing back like darkness to one's internal. May Allah protect us from it. Do you know? And why somebody might lie is important to understand. Another danger of the tongue, he says, is false speaking and false oath. These are great sins and heinous faults. In the first year of immigration, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Be careful of falsehood, as it is the companion of the sinners, and both will be in Jahannam." He also said, "Falsehood is a door of hypocrisy." Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah said, "The people say there is a difference in open and secret words and actions, an entry into and going out of hypocrisy, but the sin on which hypocrisy is built is falsehood." The Prophet said, "If you narrate to your brother such narration which he believes for you, but which you do not believe for him, it will be an act of breach of trust." And he also says, alayhi salam, "A man is enrolled near God as a liar if he is accustomed to false speaking and false discussions." The Prophet once was passing by two men. They were talking on sale of two goats, and both were swearing. One of them said, "By God, I will not sell it less than this price." Another said, "By God, I will not give more than this price." One of them purchased the goat. Then the Prophet said, "The sin of one of you has become compulsory," meaning like they were taking oaths, right? Like, by Allah, I'm not going to do this. By Allah, I will not do this. But then it ended up still happening. Do you know? It's a false oath. The Prophet said, falsehood reduces provision, meaning like if you're telling lies, it's impacting your risk. He said, the merchants are sinners. He was asked, "O Prophet of God, has not God made trade lawful?" He said, "Yes, but the tradesmen commit sin by false oaths and speak falsehood." Do you know? And like marketing, you're like getting into the psychology of things, right? And you're manipulating people. This is going to make you super happy, right? You're just selling them novelty. Do you get what I mean? Um, the Prophet said, on the resurrection day, God will not speak with three persons nor look at them: one who seeks benefit in lieu of charity, one who sells things by lies, and one who lets loose his trousers with pride. He said, if any man takes oath in the name of God and admits therein falsehood like the wing of a fly, a spot will remain in his soul up to the resurrection day. And he said, God loves three persons: one who fights standing in the row of jihad till he or his companions become victorious, one who keeps patience at the harms of his neighbor till death or journey does not separate them both, and one who prays in a corner when he stays with a party of soldiers who travel and finds a good place, takes rest or sleep. God hates three persons: a tradesman who takes false oath, a proud poor man, and a man who gives trouble. And there's a lot that like goes into it. Like lying is no joke, you know? Like it's just not. And lying applies to everybody. You know what I mean? Like I can't get my kid to do something by lying to him. Like if you do this, I'll buy you this thing. It's like, are you gonna really buy the kid this thing? No, I just said that so they would get this thing done. It's a lie. You're not only giving continuity to a practice that's a problem, but you're also lying to one you're supposed to be a caretaker of. Do you know? People lie all the time, right? Relationships are a big mess. You know how to say words to get somebody to do something. Do you know? You manipulate people's feelings and become predatorial. I'm going to tell you this so you build trust in me. And then later on, I'm going to drop you as if like I have no qualms to anything. Do you know what I mean? Deception comes in a lot of different forms, right? You also don't want to lie to yourself. And the more you lie to yourself, it doesn't change the reality of a situation, right? And inevitably, like you're going to run out of people to blame for the things that you have to confront about you. So if you are doing certain things, as hard as it is, you got to acknowledge, like, I bring this mess into existence, into my reality. And people are going to tell me things. And it's hard sometimes for me to take instruction from Allah when I don't want to hear it. But when it's coming, I got to recognize that it's coming. So lying and false oaths, he says, as the 14th thing. The 15th thing that he mentions is backbiting. And backbiting in particular, right? Like ghiba, May Allah protect us from it. Like, there's a trade-off. I can backbite with you because it deepens our relationship on a trust that is like a unstable thing to build a relationship off of. But if I know something and I'm like, hey, let me tell you something you can't tell anybody else, it now engages us in a way that makes us feel closer because I'm sharing with you something that I'm not sharing with anybody else. Do you know? So much of the world is laden in gossip that it makes it normalized and desensitizes, but it's a problem, right? Like, why do you have to read about people's lives and the messes that they have in their lives? And why is it projected all over social media and all over news and everything else? When you sit down and you talk about someone in their absence, you say what's true, it's gossip. You say what's false, that's slander, right? And the exchange in gossip, because of how detrimental it is, our mode of recompense that Allah tells us He will engage in is that your good deeds go to the person that you spoke ill of, gossiping, and you accrue bad deeds. Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, someone accused him of gossiping, and he says to them, like, who do you think you are that the likes of you would benefit from my good deeds, that I would just give them to you? Meaning, like, why would I talk about you and give this up? He found out someone was gossiping about him, and he sent him a box of chocolate with a note in it that said, thank you for gossiping about me. I will relish from the benefit of your good deeds on the day of judgment. Do you know? Wait, you're like doing so much good that you could just give it away to people? You know? And what's like the basis of all of this? It's pure shaitani, right? How is it not arrogance? And you don't need people's permission to take their characteristics. Whiteness is built on entitlement. And when you are in a place where everything feeds that sense of entitlement, it's okay for me to like say what I want to about anybody. That I'm just saying it to my friend. No, man, angels are writing it, and you're killing your heart. You're killing your heart. Why? So gossiping, he says, is the 15th thing, the 15th harm. Hypocrisy, he says, is the 16th. And in the text, he talks a lot about backbiting because it's like a big problem, do you know? But also like, what are instances in which we can understand, like, kind of talking about certain things? So when he talks about hypocrisy, understanding this at the level of like you're making claims and not doing what you're saying you're gonna do. Do you know what I mean? And we talked about this briefly, right? Lima taqulu ma la taf'alun. Why do you say that which you do not do? Do you know? And engaging in kind of verbalized hypocrisy. So you essentially are like two-faced. Do you know? And the descriptions of these as individuals who have two tongues in this world will have two tongues in the next world. And you're going to see, he talks about like on the day of resurrection, individuals as well, but hypocrisy becomes a big problem, right? And it's like you just want to be consistent. You know what I mean? Like, why am I going to smile in your face and then when you're not there, I'm going to speak poorly about you, right? Like, why do that? Do you get what I'm saying? Sorry, we're going through the rest of these quickly. The 17th thing he says is tale bearing and slander, right? So namima, like we have in the Quran Surah Humaza, you don't want to be a humaz, right? Wailulli kulli humazatil lumaza, right? The whale that gets translated as woe in Arabic, like in English, it gets translated woe. There's hadith that say like the whale is a part of hell that you're just falling. That's what you're doing. And for the person who slanders and tail bears, that's like their punishment. You're just like constantly falling. The whale, like some narrations say, is a part of hell that is so cold it burns you. Right? May Allah protect us from this. Do you know what I mean? Like, what are you setting yourself up for through a sense of entitlement? That you're, and the distinction between namima and ghaiba is like slander is false, defamation is false. Do you know? And there's so much stuff that you could do with such ease. Like, you can gossip today and backbite today and slander today without even talking to somebody and recognizing accountability for it. Do you know? Like, the number of people I run into who online, their worlds are turned upside down because they rub somebody the wrong way, and somebody goes online and posts things that are just untrue about them. And because negativity has a virality to it, people now start to think like, well, that guy must be what this person is saying, right? But in reality, you're spreading falsehood in a way that damages him but damages you, because every eye that reads it and speaks it and shares it, that's getting written down in your account as the originator of this thing. I was really upset because he told me he didn't want to marry me anymore. Well, sometimes relationships don't work out. She got me really mad because, like, she said she wasn't interested in me, right? I mean, that's what happens sometimes. It doesn't give you the right to then go and tell all kinds of people things that are just false about, and especially when it's a man talking about a woman, because they slander Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. And when no one stands with her, Allah sends revelation down, like exonerating her, right? Allah shows us that he stands with the one who's being spoken poorly against. Do you know what I mean? And your emotions can't validate any of this kind of stuff, especially like in what sense of like long-term thinking. The 18th thing that he says is like unnecessary praise. And then he talks about 19, like carelessness, like you're not really attending to your words well. Um, and uh, '18 is praise. And then the 19th thing he talks about is carelessness. So praise, for example, like unnecessary praise. Um, and he breaks down like 6 categories of praise that can be harmful. Maybe we'll go into those in more detail next time in the interest of time. Carelessness is the 19th thing that he says, that you're not really paying attention to the words as they're coming out. And then the 20th thing he says is questions of ordinary men about the divine. And those last few, maybe we'll spend more time on so that they're not just kind of left open-ended. So these are 20 harms that like Imam Ghazali talks about, right? And it's not an absolute exhaustive list, but things you want to start to use as a basis in your own inventorying, right? Of this hadith, Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyakul khayran aw liyasmut, that whosoever is habitually believing in Allah on the last day, let him utter that which is good or be silent, right? So these are things that are just not good to do, and using them as a basis to start now having more presence in like the words that we're speaking into existence and manifesting in different ways. What you'd want to think out is how much of it becomes innate, right? And how much of it is habituated and doesn't have consciousness to it. It's just coming, and like I start yelling and screaming and fighting, and I'm like in a place where I lose control. I'm around people and habitually I just start gossiping, I start lying, I start mocking, I start ridiculing. Do you know? It creates a lot of conundrum. Do you see what I mean? But a key part to disrupting it is like bringing wakefulness to it rather than just letting it run on default settings. So why don't we do this? Let's take a few minutes and turn to the persons next to us. What are we taking from tonight's conversation? What is it bringing up for us? We'll come back and discuss and make a couple of announcements, and then we'll take a pause and pray Isha, and wrap up for today. But go ahead.
I don't want to be like this stage, but I feel like for the most part, no one goes out and says like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out and love this way, I'm gonna lie about this. And that's the thing that makes conversations like this so nuanced and important to be like at top of mind. Because at the end of the day, like it is kind of human nature to use those things as a mechanism of bonding. So I think that it's really important to be mindful of like, yeah, just kind of putting across like this idea of like creating consistency in a way that your heart is no longer trying to even like have any sort of desire to engage in that kind of behavior, and that takes a lot of very intentional, like yeah, just like very intentional guarding and like work in order to get to that place, especially in a society where it's so normal to have talk about it. Because like then you do the opposite. You go, oh, like they have some sort of like weird kind of attitude. Yeah, that's kind of what I over like discussing, yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
My heart.
Yeah, I think it goes back to like intentionality though, because for instance, like you do have to like completely consistent on what so you can like be aware of like what's happening else, and then using that not just to like blankly like gossip about it, but be like, okay, I've had this new piece of information. What am I gonna do with it? I think it's like important because I don't know, like obviously in our day and age, there's a lot of people that like go wrong things and like they do the wrong things and like they come up scam. And so I think it's important like on TikTok, like if you see like whether right now there's like a resurgence of like the local and like they'll like enough to grab a mic and like start a podcast and be like, here's why women are also in hell, you know. So it's like important not like to gossip about them, to be like to like talk about them just to be like, hey, like we need to like stop this like toxic like masculinity. So that's what I was thinking about. 'Cause, like obviously like yeah, like a lot of people, I mean a lot of people do wake up and are like, you know, I'm gonna gossip because that's how they get attention. Like, you know, a lot of the aunties are like that. They're just like, this is all I have. I have nothing else going in my life other than to like talk about other people and like what his son is doing and what her daughter is doing and stuff. So I mean that does exist like more intentionally and like I don't know if it's like I'm not really like like people put down other people just so they can make themselves look like bigger, even though like they're not doing anything to actually like help themselves. So I don't think like all like talking about your is bad because like we do have to like prepare ourselves for the better. That if we don't
I guess that's the people.
live life on autopilot, then we're just gonna turn into the guys.
We're already used to
It's
it.
like that's
The Indian country.
I realize
Okay. What are some of the things we're taking away from today's conversation? Then we'll wrap up. If people want to get some cake and some of the other stuff, we'll pray Isha. Yeah, go ahead.
So we were talking about how a lot of the points we listed, like a lot, if not all of us, are guilty of that, and it comes so naturally in like our day-to-day lives. And so, like, we were kind of wondering, like, what are some steps you can take to try and remind yourself that this is not something that you can innately just do and get away with it? and how to stop yourself like gradually from.
Well, it's embedded in the Hadith, right? Like, what does the Hadith say? It says, "Speak good or be silent." So, if it's something that you do, and likely the crux of what you do in the course of a day, like in your wakeful hours, is not engaging in these kinds of things for the most part. Because a good chunk of your day is spent not in communication with anybody, right? Like you're at work, you're doing work things, you're sleeping, like, these are all times of different modes of silence, right? But in silence, you can reflect and you can contemplate. You take like a moment to pause and like, what's really about to come out of my mouth and what's really motivating it and compelling it, you know? And so the combination of the things in the hadith become important. And as the conversations take place inwardly, the silent reflection can also happen like after the fact. So at the end of the night, you spend and you inventory like what came for me that was good, what came for me that was not good, what came for me that was futile, and what's compelling it. Because an action in and of itself is not going to be exerted in a vacuum. There's a catalyst that brings it into fruition, do you know? Or there's something that it's seeking to satisfy. Like, what's the craving or the reward through the exertion of this type of talk? What is like the thing that's triggering it or putting it into existence? And if I can start to maneuver around those bookends, I can likely see what's in between diminish in some way. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? And so it's just like sometimes like I just gotta not talk so much. You know what I mean? I gotta not talk so much. Yeah. Oof. What else are we taking away? Yeah.
It was really interesting that this was the topic for today because I literally came in with the thought that like I need to watch my tongue more.
Oh wow.
Not necessarily because I'm like speaking out, but it's something I struggle with like generalization, and I talk really fast and I just say a lot of things that I don't think before I speak. So just kind of like taking away like kind of having a pause between like the thoughts and like what comes out of my mouth. And then I was like saying my discussion, there was a song, and in the interlude of the song, it just says to speak well of someone is a blessing, and to just kind of be mindful of that, like when I'm talking about others, and just to, yeah, just kind of being a bit more mindful and kind because everything is like kind of has an energy and power. We don't know how to
Yeah, amazing. Right. And when you think about what Imam Ghazali is iterating these 20 harms of the tongue, if you think about like kind of the other end of the spectrum, so to speak. So if lying is bad, like being honest is good. Do you see? So you want to not do what's wrong and you want to do what's right. Do you know? If breaking a promise is bad, like keeping a promise is good. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? And so thinking about it in like a positive framework that says, how do I start to engage in what's kind of the middle kind of engagement of this? And you look at the sunnah of the prophet, who his words were uplifting and kind of bringing people to this place of feeling whole and healed. And how do I start to read what he did in a way to learn some of those behaviors and techniques that are also like following in the prophet's footsteps, do you know? And how they were situational. He talked to like children differently than how he talked to like his wife, and how he talked to his close friends versus people that he was just meeting. And it's not going to all be exactly the same. Last thing you want to really think about in this regard is like, people's words can hurt you, right? Have you ever been hurt like by something someone has said to you? Do you know what I mean? You found out someone was speaking poorly of you, someone like yells at you, someone curses at you, does all these kinds of things. And I'm sorry, like those things happen. You want to then think if that's coming from you to somebody, even if what's pushing it forward is the hurt that someone put in your heart is now in an unhealthy mode, expressing that hurt back out towards somebody else. You got to put like a pause on it and squash it so that it doesn't have continuity and shaitan doesn't give it continuous life. But the other thing that you want to think about, right? Whoever it was that lied about you or to you, whoever like cursed at you, broke a promise, gossip, backbit, any of the things that we're talking about, At the end of that experience, were you like, man, that person must have like a beautiful heart that they're talking to me this poorly? So what do you think it's doing to your heart when you do that to someone? And if what you say hurts somebody, what someone has said to you hurts you in that way, what is it doing back to them? And if it's doing that back to them, what is it doing to you when you do the same nonsense to somebody else? And just because everybody does it, like you're not supposed to be like everybody. You're Muslim. Be different. Be comfortable being different. And recognize, like, I might have to put a little bit more effort into it. And there's got to be like more substance to my conversations with people, or more depth. Or like maybe we just don't talk so much. You know, the beauty of having a companion or a friend that you can just sit with in ease, where you don't have to say anything. And you're just there, like with each other, in each other's presence. It's a really nice thing. But from this constant mode of just like applying to somebody a standard that I'm not applying back to myself, like that's the definition of hypocrisy. Do you know? And if it's going to hurt your heart when somebody speaks to you poorly, you're hurting someone's heart when you do that to them. And if it tells you about the heart of the person who talks and treats you in this way, then your own heart is telling you something about you in the nature of like the ways that things are coming. You got to pay attention to the signs sometimes and recognize like what is my mind, my body, my heart, my spirit trying to give me an indication of. And the tongue and the utterances of the tongue can be a doorway to recognizing, hey man, I got a lot of stuff going on inside of me that eventually I got to like confront in some way. Otherwise, like, what is this going to really amount to down the line? Do you see? Okay. So, today is Monday, and next Monday, inshallah, we'll be in Ramadan. May Allah bless us to reach it, take benefit from it. I'm not going to be doing, so we're going to shift our halaqah schedules in Ramadan. And before iftar every night, we'll have a pre-iftar program. On Mondays, I teach 2 classes in our public policy school here that run into that time. So I won't be doing a Monday halaqah. And there's different people that are going to be doing it. So we'll resume with the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi post Ramadan. And all this stuff for Ramadan, I think, is up online. We're going to start advertising like charities that we're raising funds for. And similar to last year we had like 6 direct campaigns that, mashallah, we raised about $4.8 million from 48,000 individual donors. That's a lot of people just giving whatever they can. Why I'm sharing this with you is for a couple of reasons. We need like everybody to spread the word on these things, especially as funds are being cut for various programs domestically and globally. There's going to be that many more people who just won't have food to eat or shelter to live in. So of the campaigns that we likely are going to run, one is going to be to bring kind of mobile homes to people in Gaza. May Allah make it easy for them. So not just like tents, but actual like housing units that are mobile as their homes are being rebuilt. One of these units is going to cost about $5,000 for a family to live in. When I went to Morocco after the earthquake, I was on the ground like 18 hours after the earthquake, maybe a little less or more. And the Atlas Mountains, where the earthquake took place, had these like wide open plain type areas. There was nothing that was obstructing views, and all their houses were knocked down to the ground. And when I asked these people who like their homes were all in rubble, what do you need? They say, we don't need shelter. We need shelter with dignity. You see? Because when there's like nothing blocking anybody's view, how does somebody go to the bathroom? Do you know? They literally have like people creating walls around them so that you can just go to the bathroom in privacy. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's one thing we're looking to do. Another is going to be to support mothers in Gaza and potentially in Lebanon. We're trying to make that work with like maternal care units, hygiene products. Many of them are widowed with children, providing for them. That project is going to also be matched by the Bill Gates Foundation. Like for every $3, they'll give $1, right? So if we raise $3 million, they'd give $1 million towards it. And the unfortunate reality is there's a lot of like mothers and children who are left to their own vices right now in many countries in the world. The challenge with like the shifting of like funds and institutions and regime changes is that it impacts infrastructure, do you know? And the ability to kind of distribute funds gets impacted as infrastructure gets changed. So that's the second thing that we're looking at, like supporting these mothers who are now essentially like single moms raising families. When we went for Umrah, right? Some of us went for Umrah in January. I was invited to meet 200 young boys and girls who were orphans from Gaza. May Allah make it easy. And someone had brought for Umrah at that time. And they had like such a beautiful spirit and resilience. Our tradition legalistically deems someone to be an orphan if their father has passed away. Do you know? So their mothers can still be alive and they're considered an orphan. Many of them were people who had lost both of their parents. May Allah make it easy and grant them the best of reunions in the world beyond this one. We're going to raise funds for our domestic violence agency and shelter. Our shelter is open and has residents in it. And we built a shelter so that we can house people. And now we have to provide for the people that we're providing the shelter to. Local families in need. The Ida camp in the West Bank. And our brother Anas, who was abducted by soldiers in November of 2023 and then released months later. He's going to visit us this Ramadan, March 21st to the 23rd. He'll be in New York and he'll stop by and share some stuff with us. But ever since we visited Palestine in 2020 as a community before COVID hit, we've built a relationship with the Ida camp in the West Bank. Essentially is a multi-generational refugee camp of internally displaced Palestinians. So refugees in their own homeland, and they're kind of walled in by a massive wall structure that many of you have probably seen. And then we're going to also raise funds for our sisters and brothers in Sudan and try to figure out the best ways to provide support there as well. And I'm putting this in your heads now so that you all can help in getting the words out to other people. These are like projects that we vet and we ensure that things are getting on the ground. And we want to make sure that things are happening. Ramadan, as you know, here is like a very extensive endeavor. Amira likes to describe it like we're hosting 30 weddings in a row every single day for a month. So we need a lot of volunteers just to help out. So you can fill out the volunteer forms and be here and be present to assist. That would be great as well. And I don't know what else. I don't think there's any. Oh, on Thursday night, Sheikh Fayaz and I are going to be doing like a welcome Ramadan program. I think we'll have dinner served, and that's going to be at 6 o'clock on the 5th floor, like where we do Jummah. So try to come out for that as well.
There's a Latino event on Wednesday.
With the converts group, right? Yeah. Why is she leaving you out? That's so messed up. Yeah. This is why the poor man doesn't cry when he hears things, because his heart has been so wounded again and again by people as mean as Luna. If you are a convert in the community, you identify as Latino, on Wednesday at 6 in the classroom at the end of the hall, there's going to be a program on healthy relationships, and it'll go till like 9 o'clock or so. Yeah. So that'll be this Wednesday, 6 to 9. Okay. So people want to take a couple of minutes to make wudu, and we'll make Isha. If you could put chairs against the wall. And inshallah, next Monday when we see each other, it'll be Ramadan, and we'll be breaking fast together, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.